History often remembers the explosions, the fireballs over Pearl Harbor, the carrier duels at Midway, the mushroom clouds at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But sometimes, the fate of empires is decided quietly, far from cameras, far from headlines, in places most people have never heard of. In the summer of 1939, on a remote riverbank in Mongolia, Imperial Japan suffered a defeat so profound that it reshaped its entire destiny. No declaration of war, no grand surrender, just a lesson learned the hard way. And that lesson would help decide the course of World War II. At the end of the 1930s, the world stood on the edge of catastrophe. Europe was unraveling. Nazi Germany was expanding. The Soviet Union watched the world with wary eyes. And in Asia, Imperial Japan was already at war. Since 1937, Japan had been locked in a brutal conflict in China. Its armies marched inland, capturing cities and railways, convinced that victory was only a matter of time. Yet beneath the confidence, there was anxiety. Japan was an island empire with limited resources. No oil, no iron, no rubber. Expansion was not a choice. It was a perceived necessity. And inside Japan's military leadership, a fundamental question divided the nation. Where should the empire expand next?
Is the target.
Two visions clashed.
Here,
the Strike North faction believed Japan's destiny lay in Siberia, a decisive war against the Soviet Union. Siberia promised resources, land, and the destruction of a potential rival. The Strike South saw opportunity in Southeast Asia, oil-rich colonies controlled by weakened European empires. Both sides believed history was on their side. Both sides believed war was inevitable. What neither side expected was that the answer would come from a river called Khalkhin Gol. Khalkhin Gol was not meant to be important. It was a quiet border region between Japanese-controlled Manchuria and Soviet-aligned Mongolia, a place of grasslands, dust, and wandering herds. Maps disagreed on where the border even was. But in May 1939, that ambiguity turned deadly. A small Mongolian cavalry patrol crossed what Japanese considered its territory. Japanese troops responded. Shots were fired. What began as a border skirmish spiraled into something far larger. Neither Tokyo nor Moscow officially declared war, but both sent reinforcements. And slowly, silently, two empires slid toward confrontation. The Japanese forces in the region were confident. They had crushed Chinese armies. They believed deeply in the superiority of Japanese spirit, seishin. Discipline, aggression, and the willingness to die were seen as weapons more powerful than tanks or artillery. The Imperial Japanese Army viewed the Soviet military with contempt, still haunted by memories of Russia's collapse in 1917. But this time, the Soviets sent someone different, a general named Georgy Zhukov. Zhukov was not flashy. He was methodical. And he believed in modern war. Where Japanese commanders emphasized infantry assaults and courage, Zhukov emphasized coordination, infantry, armor, artillery, and air power working together. As summer turned to August, both sides prepared for a decisive clash. The Japanese planned a bold offensive, crossing the Khalkhin Gol River and encircling Soviet forces. It was aggressive. It was daring, and it was exactly what Zhukov was waiting for. At dawn, the battlefield erupted. Japanese infantry advanced under intense heat, charging forward with bayonets and machine guns. For a moment, it seemed like the old ways still worked. Then the Soviet artillery opened fire. Shells tore into Japanese formations. Soviet aircraft screamed overhead, bombing supply lines. And then came the tanks, hundreds of them. Japanese anti-tank weapons were nearly non-existent. Their soldiers fought bravely, sometimes desperately, but bravery could not stop steel. Within days, the Soviet forces executed a massive double envelopment, one of the largest mechanized maneuvers the Red Army had ever attempted. The Japanese troops were surrounded, and then annihilated. By the time the fighting ended in September 1939, the result was unmistakable. Japan had lost tens of thousands of men. Entire units ceased to exist. Veteran officers were dead or disgraced. For the first time in decades, Imperial Japan had suffered a decisive defeat, not against a collapsing empire, but against a modern, mechanized army. And the implications were terrifying. Because this wasn't just a battlefield loss, it was proof that Japan could not defeat the Soviet Union in a land war. Back in Tokyo, the shock rippled through the military. The Strike North faction, once powerful, lost its credibility overnight. The dream of conquering Siberia collapsed on the Mongolian steppe. Japan had learned a brutal lesson. It could not win a prolonged war against a mechanized superpower with tanks, artillery, and endless manpower. So Japan looked south, toward oil, toward colonies, toward the Pacific, and toward the United States. This is where Khalkhin Gol quietly reshaped world history. Because when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, Japan expected to attack the Soviet Union from the east. They didn't. Stalin, remembering Khalkhin Gol, trusted that Japan would stay neutral.
Hold the line,
Soviet divisions
closer.
were pulled from Siberia and sent
They're
west
everywhere.
to defend Moscow. Those troops would help stop the German advance. Meanwhile, Japan prepared for a different kind of war, a naval war, a Pacific war, a war that would begin at Pearl Harbor. From that moment on, Japan's fate was tied to the sea. But Japan was not built for a long industrial war. Its shipyards could not match American production. Its pilots could not be replaced fast enough. Its economy was stretched to the breaking point. And every carrier sunk, every experienced crew lost, pushed the empire closer to collapse. All because one option, the northern path, had been closed forever. By 1945, the empire that once dreamed of dominating Asia lay in ruins. Cities burned, the navy was gone, the army was isolated and starving across distant islands, and few remembered Khalkhin Gol. No victory parade, no famous speech, just a lesson buried in the grasslands of Mongolia. Yet without that battle, history might look very different. A Japanese invasion of Siberia, a Soviet collapse, a different outcome in Europe, a different world. History does not always turn on famous names or iconic moments. Sometimes it turns on a forgotten river, a forgotten battlefield, and a decision made in silence. Khalkhin Gol did not end Imperial Japan, but it doomed it. And that single defeat echoed all the way to Hiroshima. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten chapters that shaped our world, consider subscribing for more immersive history stories like this one.